Hello everyone, this evening of course, as always on this channel we will fight against the atmospheric of our world around us, and today we will talk about titration, even grand titration. But it won't be titration as the first meaning that comes to the mind of people who hear this word. It's not like titration in chemistry, that we titrate something with something to determine the amount of the substance in the solution and its stoichiometry, but it will be titration of knowledge. Actually, historical Chinese knowledge, Chinese technology, so we will refer to the book Grand Titration by Joseph Nitham. Joseph Nitham was an interesting guy. Of course, politically I completely do not agree with him because he was a fan of communism and his views were a mixture of Christianity and communism. Yeah, but it was comfortable to be communist and being a respected, distinguished professor in the one of the best British universities. One can easily check which one was it. Pan Joseph Nitham. He lived from 1900 to 1995, and during his long life, thanks to his Chinese PhD student who came to England in 1930s, and the incredible tolerance of his English wife, he started romance with his Chinese PhD student. When they were after 80, they got married, shortly before the death of the lady. But thanks to this romance, the passion in Chinese science in the head of Mr. Joseph Nitham was born. By education, he was biochemist, and by profession, quite a good one. He was studying human metabolism, different areas. But his main contribution he is famous for is the history of Chinese science. And a good sample of his contribution to the history of Chinese science is the not so big book but very dense in terms of the content, Grand Titration. It deals with the Chinese technology from different disciplines, from medicine, from technology, from agriculture technology, from architecture, from historiography. Brief characterization of Chinese historiography is also there. Brief characterization of their education system, and of course there is a fundamental Nitham question: why Chinese science in the Middle Ages, actually in the period that corresponds to European High Middle Ages, was actually brutally stopped. This progress and even a sort of regress occurred. My answer to this question is simple, that great progress in Chinese science was not killed by the property of Chinese language, which is fine for science and not only, in contrast to this what many people were claiming. Not because Chinese people were lacking some intellectual abilities and so on, not because of cultural limitations, but the main factor that killed progress in Chinese science was rapidly developing and infiltrating all areas of life of Chinese society, mandarinate, so the system of organized state bureaucracy, corrupted like hell, spoiled like hell, but always ubiquitous and almost in some region omnipotent. Corrupted mandarins, so the workers of mandarinate. Yeah, some people claim that this was the best system because the members of the mandarinate itself were just recruited thanks to the state exams that they had to pass. But if we look at the content of these exams and the questions they had to answer, these were mainly questions about Chinese classics literature and fragments from it. So it was checking only the knowledge of humanities, not only practical knowledge of being administrator. Of course, some mandarinates were better in it, some of them were worse, but almost all of them were horribly corrupted. And of course they were abhorring job, and as a gesture to show that they do not have to work physically because they get the resources for their life, so money, they can buy the resources for their lives from state. They were growing long nails on the hands to show that they don't need to work physically. They were completely spoiled people, but okay. And this mandarinate was actually at any level of the Chinese, I would say, life. That's why when a scholar invented something before it went up to people who had money or influence to spread it more, first it was noticed by member of mandarinate, so Mandarin. And such a guy, like typical official, if he doesn't understand something, he feels threatened by this. So it's always better to suppress this what we don't understand, not to. It's scary to allow it the thing we don't understand to spread around. Maybe it can threaten our comfortable position, and we will have to cut our long nails and start working with different jobs we really don't want to. So in my opinion, the main reason that Chinese science was stopped more or less at the Sung dynasty, or maybe a little bit later. So in the period that corresponds more or less to European High Middle Ages, why the incredible progress in Chinese science, really incredible, Chinese medicine and so on, was stopped, was the reason that mandarinate finished in this period its infiltration of all areas of Chinese social life. That's why it was a trend promoted by officials who had power to focus on calligraphy, focus on perfection, focus on making everything more perfect, more in harmony, so-called harmony, so everything looked the same. That's why there was no place for progress. There was a place only from perfection and accuracy. That's why Chinese nation lost a lot from its incredible creativity and became a nation of merchants and very accurate people, but no longer so creative as they were before. This is my answer on the famous Nitham question: why did Chinese science stop in the period where it stopped and development didn't move further anymore? Many people maybe don't agree with me, but this is how I see the things. And in the book Grand Titration I'm referring today, there is a few annoying things, because author is openly communist. Yeah, it was comfortable to be in 50s, 60s and 30s communist, being on the famous British university a dean and being allowed to speak any bullshit you want. And author claim, which is not true, that communism didn't stop the development of Soviet science. Of course it stopped many areas, like Wysenkism, like Michurism, like Olga Lepieszyńska, of course, but even if these cases were known to Mr. Nitham, it was not comfortable to him, as really devoted communism, to admit that his favorite system killed, for instance, Soviet biology and progress in Soviet biology, but his works. He is not the only author, but the works he initiated, a multi-volume collection about Chinese science. It's surprisingly trustworthy, with the exception of some comments, political comments of the author and authors, and it's worth reading. Grand Titration book, if we take aside some statements in which author really is in love with communism and communistic countries, the factography about Chinese science, different disciplines, is solid. That's why, despite these flaws I mentioned, this book is worth reading. So Grand Titration by Joseph Nitham is worth reading about Chinese science, good introduction to incredible world of historical development of Chinese science. All the best, have a nice day, bye.